Your brother needs it more than you do, Anna, my mother said, not even looking me in the eye as she handed over the paperwork. He has 3 kids, and you, well, you're single and successful. You understand, right? I sat there in my childhood home's kitchen, staring at the documents that essentially gave my brother Michael ownership of our grandmother's house, the house she had specifically left to me in her will. The beautiful Victorian home sat on 5 acres of prime land that had been in our family for generations. Mom, Grandma left that house to me for a reason, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the anger bubbling inside. She knew. Oh, don't start with that, my father interrupted, walking in with his reading glasses perched on his nose. Your grandmother wasn't thinking clearly in her final years. Michael needs this house. His kids need a yard to play in, room to grow. What would you do with it? Live there alone. I thought about telling them right then, about how Grandma and I had carefully planned everything before she passed. About the land surveys, the paperwork, the trust she'd set up. But looking at their dismissive faces, I decided to wait. And honestly, Anna, my mother continued, arranging cookies on a plate like we were discussing the weather rather than them giving away my inheritance. Michael's been struggling since the divorce. This would really help him get back on his feet. Of course, Michael's struggles. My brother had always been their priority, even when his struggles were entirely self-inflicted. The divorce happened because he cheated on his wife with her yoga instructor. His financial problems came from gambling and failed get-rich-quick schemes. But somehow, I was always expected to understand, to step aside, to give up what was mine for the sake of poor, struggling Michael. Have you already given him the keys? I asked, watching my mother's face carefully. She had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. He moved in yesterday. We didn't want to bother you at work with all the details. Of course they didn't. They never bothered me with details when they were making decisions about my life. I stood up, smoothing down my skirt. Well, I hope you're prepared for what comes next, I said calmly. My father's head snapped up. Is that a threat? I smiled, picking up my purse. No, Dad, just an observation. I have to go. I have a meeting with my lawyer this afternoon. Your lawyer? My mother's voice rose slightly. Anna, don't be difficult. This is about family. Yes, I agreed. It is about family. Specifically, about how Grandma trusted me to handle hers. I left them standing in the kitchen, my mother still clutching her plate of cookies, my father's face turning that familiar shade of red that appeared whenever someone challenged his authority. Driving to my lawyer's office, I thought about the last conversation I had with Grandma 6 months ago. She was sharp as ever, sitting in her favorite armchair, going over the paperwork with me. They'll try to change it, she had said, her blue eyes clear and knowing. Your parents always favored Michael, even when it wasn't in his best interests. That's why I'm leaving you the house, Anna. You're the only one who understands what needs to be done with the land. She was right, as usual. What my parents didn't know, what Michael certainly didn't know, was that the house sat on land that I already owned. Grandma had transferred the land to me 3 years ago, keeping only the house in her name. She knew about the development plans for the area, about how the land would be crucial for the nature preserve we'd been planning together. My lawyer, Mr. Patterson, was waiting for me when I arrived. I assume they made their move, he asked, gesturing for me to sit. I handed him the paperwork my mother had given me. They gave him the house, moved him in yesterday. He reviewed the documents, his eyebrows rising, without consulting the executor of the estate. That's bold. They never were good at reading the fine print, I said, pulling out my own file. The real property documents, the land ownership records, and most importantly, the conservation easement Grandma and I had put in place before her death. Shall we proceed as planned? Mr. Patterson asked, a slight smile playing at his lips. I nodded, thinking of Michael probably already planning to modernize Grandma's beautiful old house, unaware that he was about to learn a serious lesson about making assumptions. Yes, I said firmly, it's time they learned that some things are bigger than their family politics. Grandma had a vision for this land, and I intend to honor it. Mr. Patterson began preparing the notices as I looked out his office window, imagining the nature preserve that would soon protect those 5 acres for generations to come. Michael could keep the house. But he was about to discover that owning a house doesn't mean you control what happens to the land it sits on. The next morning Michael called. I watched my phone buzz 6 times before finally answering. What the hell is this notice? He demanded, his voice cracking with anger. Some lawyer saying I need permission to make any changes to the property, that I can't build the pool the kids want. I settled into my office chair, enjoying the view of the city skyline. That would be the conservation easement notice. The land the house sits on is protected now. No new construction, no major landscaping changes. It's going to be part of the Valley Grove Nature Preserve. But the house is mine. Mom and Dad gave it to me. He sounded like a petulant child. The house, yes. But the land? That's been mine for 3 years. Grandma transferred it to me long before she passed. You can live in the house, Michael, but you'll have to follow the preservation guidelines. There was a long pause, then the sound of him sputtering. You can't do this. I already promised the kids a pool, and I was going to build a game room extension. Should have checked the property records before making promises, I replied calmly. The conservation easement is legally binding. Any construction would violate state environmental protection laws. My office door opened and my assistant gestured that my next meeting was waiting. Look, Michael, I have to go. The Preservation Society will send someone by next week to mark the protected areas. Try not to disturb any of the old-growth trees. They're specifically protected under the easement. I hung up as he was mid-protest. Within minutes, my mother called. Anna Catherine Miller, she began, using my full name like I was still 10 years old. What is this nonsense about protected land? Your brother is devastated. It's not nonsense, Mom. It's a legally binding conservation easement. Grandma and I set it up together. The land will be preserved as a natural habitat, protecting the watershed and local wildlife. But what about the children? She demanded. They need space to play. They have space. They just can't build on it or destroy the natural environment. The Preservation Society runs excellent educational programs. The kids might actually learn something about ecology. My father's voice came on the line. Now listen here, young lady. We can fight this in court. You're just being spiteful because. Because what, Dad? Because you gave away my inheritance without consulting me? Because you've always favored Michael? Or because you never bothered to understand at Grandma and I shared the same values about preserving our family's legacy? Legacy, he scoffed. It's just land. No, it's not just land. It's habitat for endangered species. It's part of a crucial watershed. It's one of the last undeveloped parcels in the valley. Grandma understood that. It's why she trusted me with it. I could hear them arguing in the background, probably passing the phone back and forth. Finally, my mother came back on. We're coming over to discuss this, she announced. I'm at work, Mom. And there's nothing to discuss. The easement is filed with the state. It's permanent. But I have a meeting. Give my nieces and nephew my love. Maybe suggest they join the Junior Naturalist program. The Preservation Society offers scholarships. I ended the call and took a deep breath. My assistant poked her head in. Your parents still processing the news? She asked with a knowing smile. You could say that. Is the Preservation Society representative here? She nodded. With all the preliminary surveys, should I send them in? I stood up, straightening my jacket. Yes. Time to start planning the nature preserve Grandma always dreamed of. As I walked into the conference room, I thought about Grandma's words from our last conversation. The land remembers, Anna, she'd said, looking out over the meadow behind her house. It remembers every promise we make to it. Make sure you keep ours. The Preservation Society team spread out their maps and surveys, pointing out the rare species habitats, the watershed areas, the historic trees. All the things Grandma had taught me to value, all the things my parents and Michael had never bothered to understand. Let them have the house. The real inheritance wasn't the building. It was the responsibility to protect something larger than ourselves. Michael would figure out how to live with the restrictions or he wouldn't. Either way, the land would be protected just as Grandma wanted. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Michael. Mom and Dad are furious. You've really done it this time. I smiled, typing back. Actually, Grandma did it. I'm just keeping her promise. Then I turned back to the preservation plans, ready to honor the legacy that really mattered. 3 months later, I stood at the edge of what was now officially the Valley Grove Nature Preserve, watching as Preservation Society volunteers installed educational signage along the newly created nature trail. The autumn leaves painted the scene in brilliant oranges and reds, just as Grandma used to describe in her favorite season. Ms. Miller, a young girl, maybe 12, approached me with a notebook. I'm Katie, Michael's oldest. Are you really my aunt? I smiled, recognizing my brother's eyes in her face. I am. Nice to finally meet you properly. Dad's been really mad, she said frankly, but I kind of love what you're doing here. We saw a family of deer yesterday morning, right behind the house. And my science teacher says this is one of the most important wildlife corridors in the valley. Before I could respond, Michael appeared behind her, looking uncomfortable in a crisp morning air. Katie, go help your siblings with their Preservation Society worksheets. As she ran off, Michael cleared his throat. The kids joined that junior naturalist program you mentioned. They're actually pretty excited about it. I nodded, waiting. Michael had barely spoken to me since the easement notice, and our parents had resorted to cold silence at family gatherings. Listen, he continued, scuffing his shoe against the ground like he used to do when we were kids, and he had to apologize. I've been thinking about what Grandma used to say about this place, about how she could name every tree, every bird that nested here. She loved this land, I said quietly. She wanted to make sure it stayed the way she remembered it. Yeah, well, he looked around at the preservation team working nearby. The kids keep telling me facts about the ecosystem here. Did you know there's an endangered butterfly species that only lives in this valley? The silver-spotted azure. I smiled. Grandma used to point out their chrysalises on the old oak trees. Michael was quiet for a moment. Mom and Dad still don't get it. They keep talking about lawyers, about fighting the easement. But watching the kids get so excited about nature, about conservation, maybe you and Grandma were right. It wasn't quite an apology, but from Michael, it was something close. The house is still yours, I reminded him. You can make it a home. Just respect the land it sits on, he finished. Yeah, I'm starting to understand that. Later that afternoon, I was surprised to see my parents' car pulling up the gravel drive. They got out slowly, looking around at the preservation work with mixed expressions. Your father and I visited the county records office, my mother said without preamble. Looked up all the paperwork about the land transfer, the easement. Found out Grandma had been planning this with you for years, my father added. All those times you visited her, when we thought you were just keeping her company. We were planning a legacy, I said firmly, one that would benefit everyone, including your grandchildren. My mother's eyes followed Katie and her siblings as they enthusiastically showed a Preservation Society volunteer their wildlife observation journals. They do seem rather invested in all this, she admitted reluctantly. Michael mentioned they're learning about ecosystem preservation in school, my father added. His youngest did a whole presentation about watershed protection. I couldn't help but smile. Grandma would have loved that. She always said children understand instinctively what adults sometimes forget, that we're supposed to protect beautiful things, not just use them. My mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. She did say that, didn't she? I just never really listened. None of us did, my father said quietly. Except you. We stood there in the autumn sunshine, watching the preserve come to life around us. The educational signs, the carefully marked trails, the protected areas where wildlife could thrive undisturbed. It was everything Grandma and I had dreamed of. We were wrong, my mother finally said. About the house, about not consulting you. We just assumed. You assumed what you always have. I finished for her. That Michael's needs came first. But Grandma knew what she was doing when she chose me for this. It was never about the house. It was about protecting something precious. My father put his arm around my mother's shoulders. Your grandmother would be proud, Anna. You've turned her dream into reality. As if to emphasize his words, a pair of deer emerged from the woods, cautiously making their way across the meadow. Katie and her siblings watched in hushed excitement, their observation journals forgotten in their hands. Yes, I said softly, thinking of Grandma's smile when we'd finalized the preservation plans. This is exactly what she wanted. The preserve would stand as her true legacy, not a house to be fought over, but a protected piece of nature for generations to enjoy. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about getting even, but about proving that you understood something valuable all along. Looking at my family gathered there, finally beginning to understand what Grandma and I had known all along, I felt at peace. Some inheritances aren't about property or possessions. They're about wisdom, foresight, and the courage to protect what matters most.